Victoria Montgomery Wells reigned supreme over Pacific Heights society, where her word could make or break reputations with a single champagne toast. During her lavish summer gala, she never imagined that humiliating a quiet maid would be her undoing. But in San Francisco's world of old money and new tech, appearances can be deceiving, and karma sometimes arrives wearing a servant's uniform and carrying a silver tray full of secrets. Victoria Montgomery Wells stood beneath the magnificent crystal chandelier in her grand ballroom, champagne flute poised delicately between her manicured fingers. The annual Montgomery Wells Summer Gala was in full swing, with Silicon Valley's elite mingling throughout her sprawling Pacific Heights mansion. At 52, Victoria had perfected the art of being the center of attention while appearing completely indifferent to it. Her steel gray hair was swept into an immaculate chignon, and her Valentino gown caught the light in ways that made other women whisper behind their hands. The mansion, a 12,000 square foot testament to old money and new technology, money combined, had been in her husband's family for 3 generations. Not that Gerald was around anymore. The divorce had been finalized last year, but Victoria had made sure to keep the house. It was her crown jewel, her status symbol, her proof that she belonged among San Francisco's oldest families. Mrs. Montgomery Wells, there seems to be an issue with the catering in the kitchen. Maya, one of the temporary staff hired for the evening, approached with obvious hesitation. Victoria didn't bother to turn fully toward the young woman, instead watching her guests through the reflection in one of the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Then handle it," she said, her voice dripping with the practiced condescension of someone who had never had to handle such matters herself. "That's what we're paying you for, isn't it?" "Yes, but the chef is asking for—" "I don't care what the chef is asking for." Victoria cut her off, finally turning to face the maid. She noticed Maya's uniform, pressed but clearly not of the highest quality, and her simple silver necklace that probably cost less than Victoria's monthly flower budget. "Do you see what's happening here?" She gestured to the room full of tech billionaires, venture capitalists, and old money families. "This is the event of the season. I have the CEO of Quantum Dynamics discussing a merger with Silicon Valley's newest unicorn founder. The governor's wife is by the piano. And you're bothering me about kitchen problems?" A few nearby guests turned to watch the exchange, their interest poorly concealed behind crystal glasses and subtle smirks. Victoria felt energized by their attention, as she always did. Maya's cheeks flushed, but she stood her ground. "Ma'am, it's about the allergies of one of your guests." "Oh, heaven's sake," Victoria laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. She turned to her audience, which had grown larger. "Can you believe this? The help these days really doesn't understand their place anymore." She looked Maya up and down again. "Let me explain something to you, dear. People like you work for people like me because you lack the capacity to handle real responsibility. That's why you're serving drinks instead of drinking them. Now, go back to the kitchen, do your job, and don't embarrass yourself further by pretending you understand anything about how to run an event like this." Maya's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Something flashed in her dark eyes. Not hurt, as Victoria expected, but something else, something that made Victoria feel suddenly uncertain, though she'd never admit it. "As you wish, Mrs. Montgomery Wells," Maya said quietly, turning away with far more grace than Victoria had expected. "Can you imagine?" Victoria said to her gathered audience, recovering her composure. "I remember when household staff knew their place. My mother always said you can judge a person's breeding by how they handle those beneath them." The crowd offered appropriate murmurs of agreement, though Victoria noticed a few glances exchanged between her guests. She pushed away a nagging feeling of discomfort. The night continued, and Victoria held court as she always did, moving from group to group, ensuring her social dominance remained unchallenged. It wasn't until later in the evening, as she overheard 2 women talking in the powder room, that the first crack appeared in her perfect facade. "Did you hear about Gerald's new venture?" one woman whispered to another, not realizing Victoria was in the adjacent powder room. "They say he's partnered with some brilliant young developer, someone who's been buying up half of Pacific Heights through a shell corporation." "I heard it's a woman," the other replied. "Someone who came from nothing. Can you imagine? They say she worked as a house cleaner while putting herself through MIT. Now she's worth billions after that AI algorithm she developed." Victoria's hand froze in the act of reapplying her lipstick. Gerald hadn't mentioned any new ventures during the divorce proceedings. Then again, they hadn't exactly been on speaking terms. She made a mental note to have her financial advisor look into it first thing Monday morning. The gala continued well into the night, but Victoria found herself watching Maya more closely. The young woman moved through the crowd with an easy grace that seemed at odds with her uniform. Several times, Victoria caught her in what appeared to be detailed conversations with some of the most powerful tech executives in attendance, though Maya always deftly returned to her serving duties before Victoria could get close enough to hear what was being discussed. As the last guest departed and the cleanup crew began their work, Victoria retreated to her study, a wood-paneled room that had been her sanctuary during the divorce. She poured herself a generous glass of bourbon and pulled up her banking app. The monthly mortgage payment was due soon, and for the first time in years, she felt a twinge of worry. Gerald's alimony payments had been unexpectedly delayed this month, and her personal accounts weren't quite as robust as they had been. A knock at the study door interrupted her thoughts. It was Maya, still in her uniform, but somehow looking different now that the other guests had gone. "Mrs. Montgomery Wells," Maya said, stepping into the room without waiting for permission. "I wanted to thank you for the enlightening evening." In her tone made Victoria straighten in her chair. "The cleaning crew can see themselves out. You're dismissed." Maya smiled, a small, knowing smile that made Victoria's skin prickle. "Actually, I have something for you." She reached into her pocket and withdrew an envelope, placing it carefully on the desk between them. "This should have been delivered to you yesterday, but I asked my lawyer to hold off until after your gala. I wouldn't want to spoil such an important event." Victoria stared at the envelope, her fingertips going cold, despite the bourbon warming her chest. "Your lawyer?" "Open it," Maya said softly. "I think you'll find it's all in order." With trembling fingers, Victoria broke the seal and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Her eyes scanned the first page, then returned to the top to read it again more slowly. The glass of bourbon slipped from her hand, landing on the antique carpet with a dull thud. "This is impossible," Victoria whispered, but even as she said it, pieces began falling into place. The overheard conversation, the way Maya had carried herself, the strange looks from some of her guests. Maya, if that was even her real name, settled into the leather chair across from the desk, smoothing her uniform with an elegant gesture that now seemed like an entirely different kind of performance. "Nothing's impossible, Mrs. Montgomery Wells. Some of us just work a little harder to make things possible. Now, shall we discuss the terms of your new lease?" Victoria stared at the woman before her, the words on the document swimming in her vision. The mortgage had been purchased, the shell corporation mentioned in the powder room gossip, the brilliant developer Gerald had partnered with. It was all connected, and Victoria was only now beginning to understand just how completely the ground had shifted beneath her perfectly manicured feet. Maya leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with something that wasn't quite triumph, but wasn't quite kindness either. "Don't worry, I'm not unreasonable. Unlike some people, I understand the importance of treating others with dignity, regardless of their position." Victoria's world, so carefully constructed over decades of social climbing and strategic marriages, began to spin on its axis. But this was just the beginning of a story that would reshape not only her life, but the lives of everyone in their exclusive Pacific Heights enclave. As Maya settled more comfortably into the chair, Gerald's chair, Victoria realized that her carefully orchestrated symphony of power was about to change its tune entirely. The crystal chandelier above them caught the light from the desk lamp, sending fractured rainbows across the room. Victoria watched as one particular beam seemed to illuminate Maya's simple silver necklace, the one she'd dismissed earlier as cheap costume jewelry. Now, with her world crumbling around her, she realized it was a small silver key, a key that probably opened a very particular safe deposit box, containing secrets that Victoria wasn't yet ready to face. The night was far from over, and Victoria Montgomery Wells was about to learn that karma sometimes arrives wearing a maid's uniform. "I should have you removed from the premises," Victoria said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "With all due respect, Mrs. Montgomery Wells," Maya replied, pulling another document from her pocket. "I've already had the security team's contracts transferred to my company. They now work for me." She unfolded the paper with deliberate slowness. "Just like the gardeners, the housekeepers, and yes, even Alfonso, your cherished personal chef of 15 years. Victoria's face drained of color. Alfonso had been with her since before her marriage to Gerald. He knew all her preferences, her dietary restrictions, her secret comfort foods after every social disappointment. Alfonso's daughter just got accepted to Stanford Medical School, Maya said softly. Full scholarship. Merit-based, of course. She's brilliant. Just needed the right opportunity to shine. The implications hung heavy in the air. Victoria's hands clenched into fists beneath the desk. How long? She managed to ask. How long have you been planning this? Maya's expression softened slightly. Would you believe it wasn't initially about you at all? 3 years ago, I was working my way through MIT, cleaning houses in Pacific Heights to pay tuition. Your house was on my regular rotation every other Thursday. She gestured to the wood-paneled walls. I used to admire this study while I dusted it. The first time I came in here, you were on the phone, talking about how you just fired your housekeeper of 20 years because she asked for time off to attend her son's graduation. Victoria remembered that day. She'd been angry because the graduation ceremony conflicted with one of her charity luncheons. She was being unreasonable, she said stiffly. Maria's son was graduating summa cum laude from Berkeley, Maya continued, first in his family to go to college. She'd worked 3 jobs to help put him through school. You didn't even know his name. Shame crept up Victoria's neck, but she pushed it away. I don't see how my staffing decisions from years ago are relevant to whatever this is. Maya stood and walked to the window, looking out over the illuminated garden where, just hours ago, San Francisco's elite had been sipping champagne and making deals. During my senior year, I developed an algorithm. It started as my thesis project, using artificial intelligence to predict property market trends and identify undervalued assets. Gerald was one of the venture capitalists who saw its potential. Victoria's breath caught. Gerald knew about this? Gerald knew he was investing in a promising startup, Maya corrected. He didn't know who was behind it. I made sure of that. I used some of the initial funding to create a series of shell corporations, each one designed to acquire specific properties in Pacific Heights. Your mortgage holder was particularly interested in my offer. The bourbon's warmth had turned to ice in Victoria's stomach. Why? Why go to all this trouble? Maya turned back to face her, and for the first time, Victoria saw steel beneath the serene exterior. Because people like you need to learn that the world is changing. The power you've held so carelessly, the way you've treated people you considered beneath you, it's not sustainable. And sometimes the lesson needs to be personal. Victoria thought about every dismissive comment, every casual cruelty she'd inflicted on her household staff over the years. How many of them now worked for Maya? How many had watched her preside over tonight's gala, knowing what was coming? What do you want? Victoria asked, hating the tremor in her voice. First, I want you to understand your position, Maya said, returning to her seat. This house, which you fought so hard to keep in the divorce, now belongs to me. The staff you've relied on for years are now my employees. Your social circle? She smiled thinly. Let's just say that several of your guests tonight were very interested in doing business with the new owner of this property. Victoria felt the walls of her carefully constructed world closing in. And Gerald? Was this his way of getting revenge for the divorce? Maya laughed softly. Gerald is merely a minority investor in my company. He has no idea about any of this, though I suspect he'll find it quite interesting when he learns about it, probably at tomorrow's board meeting. The grandfather clock in the corner, a family heirloom from Gerald's grandmother, chimed midnight. Victoria jumped at the sound, suddenly aware of how quiet the house had become. The cleanup crew must have finished and left, leaving her alone with Maya. You have 2 choices, Maya said, standing once more. You can leave now, with dignity, and I'll provide you with a generous relocation package, enough to start fresh somewhere else, away from the whispers and scandals that are bound to follow. Or, she let the word hang in the air. Or? Victoria prompted, despite herself. Maya's smile widened slightly. Or you can stay, as my guest, and learn what it means to earn your place in this house. The choice is yours, but I should warn you, I'm a far more demanding employer than you ever were. Victoria stared at the woman before her, seeing her truly for the first time. The simple uniform now seemed like a costume, a carefully chosen disguise that Victoria had been too blind to see through. How many other Mayas were out there, she wondered, watching and waiting behind carefully crafted masks. The crystal chandelier continued to spin fractured light across the study, and somewhere in the distance, a car alarm began to wail. Victoria Montgomery Wells, Queen of Pacific Heights Society, faced the most difficult decision of her privileged life, and Maya, the maid who wasn't really a maid, waited patiently for her answer. But the night still held more surprises, and Victoria was about to discover that Maya's plan went far deeper than simply acquiring a mansion. Victoria's throat felt dry as she considered Maya's proposition. The thought of staying in her own home as a guest was humiliating, but the prospect of leaving, of facing her social circle's inevitable judgment, seemed equally unbearable. "Tick-tock, Mrs. Montgomery Wells," Maya said softly. "Unlike you, I do value people's time, including my own." Victoria's eyes darted to the small Monet on the wall, her prized possession, acquired at Christie's for a sum that could have funded several college educations. "The art collection is part of the house sale agreement," Maya finished for her. "Though I must say, your taste in art is questionable at best. Did you know that the Monet you're staring at so longingly is a reproduction?" Victoria's head snapped back to Maya. "That's impossible. I have the provenance papers." "Forged," Maya interrupted, pulling out her phone and pulling up some documents. "Your art dealer, Harrison, has been selling forgeries to wealthy clients for years. He targets people like you, more concerned with the prestige of owning a Monet than actually appreciating art." She paused, letting the information sink in. "He's being arrested tomorrow morning. Another investment of mine, a cybersecurity firm, helped the FBI track his operation." Victoria felt the room spin. Harrison had sold her most of her collection. If they were all forgeries— "You're lying," she whispered, but without conviction. "The real pieces are in various museums around the world," Maya continued. "I've arranged for the forgeries to be donated to art schools. They make excellent teaching tools for spotting fakes. Of course, once the news breaks about Harrison's arrest, everyone will be questioning their collections. Society columns love a good art fraud scandal, don't they?" Victoria's hands gripped the edge of her desk. Each revelation felt like another brick being removed from the foundation of her life. Why did you? "Let's just say I've had 3 years to plan this," Maya replied. "While you were busy throwing parties and belittling your staff, I was building a network. Every person you dismissed as beneath you became a potential ally. Your gardener's brother works for the FBI's Art Crimes Division. Your former housekeeper's daughter is a financial analyst who helped me track your investment patterns. Even your favorite salon owner, the one you always complained about to her face while she did your hair, she's been keeping me informed about your social circle's secrets for months." Victoria thought about all the confidential conversations she'd had while getting her hair done, all the gossip she'd carelessly shared, never considering that the people she treated as furniture might be listening and remembering. "The thing about truly wealthy people, Mrs. Montgomery Wells," Maya continued, "is that they understand the value of people, all people. Your mistake was thinking that money alone made you superior, but real power, real influence, that comes from understanding that every person has value, has potential." A soft knock at the study door interrupted them. Alfonso entered, carrying a silver tray with 2 cups of tea. He avoided Victoria's eyes as he set the tray down. "Your usual chamomile, Ms. Rivera," he said to Maya, then turned slightly to Victoria. "And English breakfast with 1 sugar and a splash of milk for you, Mrs. Montgomery Wells. As always." Victoria stared at the tea service, her grandmother's silver, the Wedgwood cups she'd collected, everything familiar yet suddenly foreign. "Alfonso," she began, but he was already leaving, closing the door softly behind him. "Ms. Rivera?" Victoria questioned, looking at Maya. "Maya Rivera," she confirmed, "though most people in the tech world know me as MR Innovations founder and CEO, your ex-husband's new partner, among other things." She picked up her teacup, inhaling the steam. "Now, about your decision. The movers will be here at noon tomorrow. You can either instruct them where to deliver your personal belongings, or you can accept my offer to stay. Under new terms, of course." Victoria's finger traced the rim of her teacup, a nervous habit she thought she'd broken years ago. "And what exactly would these terms entail?" Maya's smile was enigmatic. "Let's just say you'll gain a new perspective on household management. But first, there's something else you should know about tomorrow's schedule. The grandfather clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the suddenly too large study. Outside, fog was rolling in from the bay, shrouding the garden in an ethereal mist. But inside, in the warm glow of the desk lamp, two women sat facing each other across a mahogany desk, while the true scope of Maya Rivera's plan continued to unfold. Victoria didn't know it yet, but her decision tonight would set in motion a chain of events that would reshape not just her life, but the entire social hierarchy of Pacific Heights. And Maya was just getting started. "Tomorrow's schedule," Victoria repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Maya set down her teacup with practiced precision. "Yes. You see, I'm hosting a brunch here tomorrow. I've invited the board members of the Pacific Heights Preservation Society. Your pride and joy, if I'm not mistaken." Victoria felt her chest tighten. The Preservation Society was her crowning achievement, her way of cementing her position among the old guard of San Francisco society. She'd spent years cultivating her role as chairwoman, carefully controlling who was allowed into their exclusive circle. "You can't," she breathed. "The society bylaws clearly state that the chairperson must be a property owner in Pacific Heights," Maya finished. "Well, as of today, I own 3 properties in the neighborhood. Your house, the Victorian on Lyon Street, and the Anderson estate on Broadway." Victoria's teacup clattered against its saucer. "The Andersons would never sell to someone like me." Maya's eyes glittered. Margaret Anderson was quite eager to sell, actually, especially after I helped her grandson's tech startup secure Series A funding. Did you know he developed an app that helps first-generation college students navigate financial aid applications? Of course you didn't. You rejected his request to present it at your annual charity gala last spring, said it wasn't prestigious enough for your guest list. Each word felt like a carefully aimed arrow, hitting every vulnerable spot in Victoria's armor. She thought of young Thomas Anderson, Margaret's grandson, whom she'd dismissed so casually. She'd seen him at tech events since then, but hadn't made the connection. "The brunch tomorrow," Maya continued, "will be quite interesting. I've invited several people you might remember. Maria's son, the Berkeley graduate you couldn't spare your housekeeper to see graduate. He's now a civil rights attorney. He'll be discussing the working conditions of domestic staff in Pacific Heights mansions." Victoria's mind raced through the implications. The society women she'd cultivated, the alliances she'd built, all of them would be there, watching as her carefully constructed world crumbled. "I've also invited Gerald," Maya added casually. "He seemed quite interested in seeing the house again, especially after I mentioned certain documents I found in the library safe." Victoria's head snapped up. "What documents?" "Let's just say your divorce settlement might have been very different if Gerald's lawyers had known about your offshore accounts." Maya's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "The ones you set up using the identity of your previous housekeeper, the one who conveniently couldn't read English well enough to understand what she was signing. Find the safe combination? You really should be more careful about leaving your passwords lying around. The note in your jewelry box wasn't as well hidden as you thought." Maya stood, smoothing her uniform. "Your regular Thursday housekeeper had plenty of time to document everything while you were at your weekly tennis lessons." Victoria felt the walls closing in. Every casual cruelty, every dismissive gesture, every person she'd stepped on during her climb to social prominence. Maya had somehow woven them all into an intricate web, and Victoria was caught at its center. "The choice is still yours," Maya said, walking to the study door. "Stay and learn what it means to earn respect, or leave and face what's coming. Either way, tomorrow's brunch will be quite educational." She paused at the threshold. "Oh, and Victoria? The uniform closet is down the hall. If you decide to stay, you'll find one in your size. I took the liberty of having it tailored." The door closed softly behind her, leaving Victoria alone with her reflection in the window. The fog had grown thicker, obscuring her beloved view of the bay. Somewhere in the house, she heard footsteps, Maya's footsteps, moving with confident purpose through the halls that had once been Victoria's domain. The grandfather clock continued its relentless count of the minutes, each tick bringing her closer to tomorrow's reckoning. And as Victoria Montgomery Wells sat in her study, no, Maya's study now, she realized that her real challenge wasn't just choosing between staying or leaving, it was facing the truth about who she really was and who she might need to become. But Maya wasn't finished with her lessons. The brunch tomorrow would only be the beginning of a transformation that would ripple through the entire community, and Victoria's decision tonight would determine whether she would be a cautionary tale or a story of redemption. Victoria's fingers trembled as she opened the uniform closet. True to Maya's word, a pristine black uniform hung in her exact size, the fabric far finer than what the other staff wore. A cruel touch, Victoria thought. Even in humiliation, she was meant to stand apart. The sound of voices drifted up from downstairs. Through the window, she could see cars beginning to arrive for the brunch. Range Rovers and Teslas pulled into her circular driveway. No, Maya's driveway now, disgorging San Francisco's elite into the morning fog. Having trouble with the zipper? Victoria whirled around to find Maya standing in the doorway, no longer in her maid's uniform. Instead, she wore a perfectly tailored Chanel suit that Victoria recognized from the latest collection, one she herself had been waitlisted for. "I'm not wearing this," Victoria said, trying to summon her old authority. "Then I suggest you pack quickly," Maya replied. "The first guests are arriving, and I'd hate for them to see their former queen in such a state of uncertainty." She stepped into the room, her Louboutins clicking on the hardwood floors. "Though I should warn you, the press is outside too. Someone leaked the story about Harrison's art fraud scheme. They're particularly interested in interviewing his most prominent clients." A car door slammed outside, followed by the distinctive laugh of Margaret Anderson. Victoria's stomach churned. "Tick-tock," Maya said softly. "Your choice, Victoria. But remember, sometimes the greatest power lies in knowing when to bow." At her reflection in the full-length mirror. Designer dress wrinkled from the night before, mascara slightly smudged, hair falling from its perfect chignon. Then she looked at the uniform. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "You've won. You have the house, the society position, everything. Why not just let me leave?" Maya's reflection appeared beside hers in the mirror. "Because some lessons can't be taught through loss alone. Sometimes they must be learned through experience." She turned to face Victoria directly. "Did you know that when I was cleaning this house, I found letters in the attic? Correspondence between your grandmother-in-law and her staff during the Great Depression. She gave them all housing when they lost their homes, made sure their children stayed in school, treated them like family." Victoria had never bothered to look through the attic, had dismissed it as storage for outdated memories. "This house," Maya continued, "has a history of both cruelty and kindness. You chose cruelty. I'm offering you a chance to understand the other path." Downstairs, the murmur of voices grew louder. Victoria could pick out individual voices now. The governor's wife, tech billionaires, old money families, all gathering to witness, what? Her humiliation? Her redemption? "The uniform is a beginning," Maya said, moving toward the door. "What it becomes is up to you, but I suggest you decide quickly. Gerald just arrived, and he's quite interested in discussing those offshore accounts." The door closed again, leaving Victoria alone with her reflection and the uniform. Outside, fog continued to roll in from the bay, shrouding the garden where she'd hosted countless parties, each designed to reinforce her social position. Now, those same carefully tended roses would witness a very different kind of social event. She reached for the uniform, its fabric cool under her fingers. But Maya wasn't done orchestrating her symphony of comeuppance, and the brunch downstairs was about to reveal layers of her plan that even Victoria couldn't imagine. With shaking fingers, Victoria fastened the last button of the uniform. The fit was perfect, another reminder of how long Maya had been planning this. She caught her reflection again and barely recognized herself. The transformation wasn't just in the clothes, something in her eyes had changed. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Alfonso stood there, his expression gentle despite everything. "The guests are asking for you," he said quietly. "Ms. Rivera thought you might need these." He held out a small silver tray. On it lay Victoria's own pearl earrings, the ones her mother had given her for her 16th birthday, the only piece of jewelry she'd earned rather than bought or married into. "Alfonso," Victoria began, her voice catching, "all those years—" "Were educational for us both, Senora," he said. "My daughter starts medical school next week. Sometimes life gives us the chance to see things from a new perspective." He set the tray down on the dresser. "The real question is, what will you do with yours?" Before Victoria could respond, the sound of champagne glasses clinking floated up from downstairs, followed by Maya's voice warmly welcoming her guests. Victoria moved to the window, watching as more cars arrived. She recognized the distinctive silver hair of Margaret Anderson, the confident stride of Gerald's lawyer, and, her heart nearly stopped, Maria's son in his crisp suit, looking every bit the successful attorney Maya had described. "They're in the conservatory," Alfonso said. "Ms. Rivera is about to make her opening remarks." Victoria squared her shoulders, pinned on the pearl earrings, and took one last look in the mirror. The uniform might be impeccable, but her eyes showed every minute of the sleepless night before. The descent down the grand staircase, how many times had she made this entrance as hostess, felt surreal. Each step brought new voices into focus, conversations that stopped abruptly as she passed. She caught fragments. Offshore accounts. Art fraud investigation. Domestic staff lawsuit. The conservatory doors stood open, sunlight streaming through the fog to illuminate the gathered crowd. Maya stood at the center, resplendent in her Chanel suit, commanding the room's attention with an ease Victoria had always tried to fake. "Ah, Victoria," Maya's voice carried across the room. "Perfect timing. I was just about to discuss the new direction of the Pacific Heights Preservation Society." All eyes turned to Victoria, standing in her uniform at the edge of the room. She saw shock, pity, and, most painfully, understanding dawn on faces she had known for years. These people had watched her rise, had facilitated her social climbing, had attended her parties and shared her secrets. Now they watched her serve them. But Maya wasn't finished. She raised her glass, and the room quieted. "I'd like to propose a toast," she began, "to new beginnings, and to announce the creation of the Pacific Heights Community Foundation." She paused, her eyes finding Victoria's. "A joint venture between MR Innovations and the Preservation Society, dedicated to preserving not just the historic homes of this neighborhood, but the dignity and opportunities of those who make these houses into homes." Victoria felt the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just about her humiliation. It was about transformation. Maya was rewriting the social contract of Pacific Heights itself, using Victoria's fall from grace as merely the opening chapter. A movement caught her eye. Gerald, standing near the French doors, studying some papers handed to him by his lawyer, his face had gone pale. Whatever Maya had revealed about those offshore accounts, it was just the beginning. "Victoria!" Maya called out, her voice carrying that same gentle authority she'd shown in the study. "Would you help Alfonso bring in the mimosas? And then perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on the Foundation's first initiative?" The room held its breath. Victoria Montgomery Wells, Queen of Pacific Heights Society, stood frozen in her uniform, facing a choice that went far beyond serving drinks. Maya had orchestrated not just her fall, but offered her a chance at something she'd never considered valuable: redemption. But the true scope of Maya's plan was still unfolding, and the mimosas weren't the only things about to be served. Victoria moved toward the service door, her legs somehow carrying her forward despite her internal turmoil. In the kitchen, Alfonso was arranging champagne flutes on silver trays, each one polished to mirror brightness. "The secret," he said quietly as she approached, "is to keep your eyes level, never look down." The simple dignity in his words struck her. How many times had she spoken to him while looking at her phone, or over her shoulder, or past him entirely? As they worked together preparing the drinks, Victoria noticed something else. The other staff moved with a synchronized efficiency she'd never appreciated before. Each person knew their role, anticipated needs before they arose, communicated with subtle glances and slight gestures. It was like watching a ballet she'd had season tickets to, but had never actually seen. Back in the conservatory, Maya was outlining her vision for the foundation. "Our first project will be establishing a scholarship program for the children of domestic staff throughout Pacific Heights. Merit-based, of course, but with a focus on students who've shown exceptional drive while helping support their families." Victoria emerged with her tray of mimosas, Alfonso beside her. As she served drinks to people who'd been her social peers just yesterday, she caught fragments of their reactions. Brilliant, really, addressing the generational wealth gap. Always said these homes needed a more community-minded approach. Can't believe what Victoria did to her staff's retirement funds. That last comment made her nearly drop her tray. Retirement funds? She turned to look at Maya, who was now deep in conversation with Gerald and his lawyer. Gerald's face had moved from pale to ashen. Yes, Maya was saying loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. The audit revealed quite a pattern. Retirement contributions skimmed, Social Security payments misreported, health care benefits promised but never delivered. She shook her head sadly. But that's why the Foundation's second initiative is so important. Establishing a proper benefit system for all domestic staff in member households. Victoria's mind raced. The household accounts, the ones she'd always left to her accountant. Had she ever actually checked where the money was going? Had she become so focused on maintaining appearances that she'd allowed actual theft to happen under her watch? Mrs. Montgomery Wells, a familiar voice said. Victoria turned to find Maria's son, James, holding out his empty champagne flute. His eyes held none of the anger she'd expected, only a calm, professional assessment. I believe we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow to discuss the class action lawsuit, unless, of course, you'd prefer to join our mediation program. Mediation? Victoria managed to ask, taking his glass. Yes, he smiled slightly. Ms. Rivera suggested we offer former employers a chance to make amends through community service and restitution, rather than facing criminal charges. She seems to believe in second chances. Before Victoria could respond, Maya's voice cut through the room again. And now, I'd like to introduce our Foundation's first volunteer coordinator, someone who brings a unique perspective to the role. All eyes turned to Victoria. That is, if she accepts the position. The room went silent. Victoria stood frozen, the empty champagne flute in her hand catching the morning light. In that crystal reflection, she saw everything, her past arrogance, her present humiliation, and suddenly, startlingly, a possible future she'd never imagined. Maya moved to stand beside her, close enough to whisper, "Sometimes the best way to maintain power is to give it away. Your grandmother-in-law understood that. The question is, do you?" The fog outside had begun to lift, sunlight streaming through the conservatory windows in earnest now. Victoria looked around the room, at Alfonso's quiet dignity, at James's professional composure, at Gerald's guilty discomfort, at the faces of her former peers now watching her with a mixture of curiosity and judgment, and finally at Maya, who had orchestrated this entire symphony of redemption. But Maya's master plan wasn't complete yet. As Victoria opened her mouth to respond, a new arrival at the conservatory door caused a ripple of whispers through the crowd. Standing in the doorway was Linda Chen Montgomery, Gerald's mother, the family matriarch who had been mysteriously absent from Pacific Heights social circles for the past 5 years. At 82, she still carried herself with the quiet authority that had once made her the true power behind the neighborhood's social scene. Victoria felt her breath catch. Linda had opposed her marriage to Gerald from the start, had warned her son about Victoria's social climbing ambitions. When Gerald and Victoria had taken control of the family's charitable foundation, Linda had withdrawn from public life entirely. "Right on time, Mrs. Chen Montgomery," Maya said warmly, crossing the room to greet her. "Or, should I say, my most valuable advisor." The pieces suddenly clicked into place in Victoria's mind. Linda's disappearance from society hadn't been about retirement at all. She'd been watching, waiting, perhaps even guiding Maya's careful orchestration of this moment. "I told you, Maya, dear. Call me Linda," the older woman said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent room. Her eyes found Victoria in her uniform. "Well, well, finally wearing something appropriate for your character, I see." Gerald stepped forward. "Mother, what are you doing here? You haven't been to the house since you and Victoria took control of the family foundation?" Linda's smile was razor sharp. "Did you never wonder why I spent so much time at that little coffee shop near MIT? The one where a brilliant young woman was working her way through school?" She patted Maya's hand. "Sometimes the best way to correct a wrong is to find the right person to make it right." Victoria's mind spun. All those years of thinking she'd outmaneuvered her mother-in-law when Linda had been quietly building an alliance with Maya, probably sharing decades of social knowledge, family connections, and most devastatingly, family secrets. "The foundation wasn't yours to take," Linda continued, addressing both Gerald and Victoria. It was established by my grandmother to ensure that this community took care of all its members, not just the wealthy ones. Your grandfather," she looked at Gerald, "understood that. He worked as a housekeeper himself when he first came to America, something you both seem to have conveniently forgotten." The room was deadly quiet now, the gathered social elite witnessing the unveiling of a plan years in the making. Victoria realized that Maya hadn't just orchestrated a personal humbling. She'd been chosen to help restore the neighborhood's original purpose, with Linda Chen Montgomery's blessing. "Now then," Linda said briskly, moving to take a seat in what had once been Victoria's favorite chair, "I believe we were discussing the Foundation's new direction. Maya, dear, shall we tell them about the housing initiative?" Maya's smile widened slightly. "Actually, I thought Victoria might like to present that part. After all, her new role as volunteer coordinator will be crucial to its success." She turned to Victoria, challenge glinting in her eyes. "That is if she's ready to honor the real legacy of this house?" Victoria stood at the crossroads of her past and a possible future. The uniform she wore felt different now, less a symbol of humiliation and more a reminder of her grandmother-in-law's journey. Linda had orchestrated this moment just as carefully as Maya, playing a longer game than Victoria had ever imagined possible. The room waited for her response, but the story's final act was still unfolding. Because there was one more surprise guest about to arrive, one final piece of Maya and Linda's grand design that would force Victoria to confront not just who she had been, but who she might become. The conservatory doors opened once more, and Victoria's breath stopped completely. Standing there was her own mother, Eleanor Bradford, looking far older than her 70 years. She was dressed not in her usual designer wear, but in a simple dress Victoria had never seen before. "Hello, Victoria," Eleanor said softly. "Or should I say, hello again?" Victoria stared in confusion until Maya gently explained, "Your mother has been working as a housekeeper in the Anderson estate for the past year, under a different name, of course." "Impossible," Victoria whispered. Her mother, the woman who had taught her that status was everything, that servants were beneath them, had been working as... "After your father's gambling debts came to light," Eleanor said, moving into the room, "and you refused to help, I had to find a way to survive." Her voice carried no bitterness, only a profound weariness. "Linda found me sleeping in my car. She and Maya offered me a choice, much like the one you're facing now." The room watched in stunned silence as Eleanor Bradford, once the doyenne of San Francisco society, came to stand beside her daughter. Both women now in servants' uniforms, the ultimate symbol of Maya and Linda's intricate plan. "I learned more in this past year than in all my decades of giving orders," Eleanor continued, "about dignity, about the real meaning of class, about the people I once looked right through." She touched Victoria's arm gently. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but Maya and Linda helped me understand. Some lessons can't be taught, they must be lived." Victoria looked around the room, at her mother's quiet dignity, at Linda's satisfied smile, at Maya's calm authority, at the gathered witnesses to this extraordinary transformation. She understood now that this had never been just about humbling her. It was about healing a legacy of hurt that went back generations. "The housing initiative," Maya prompted gently, "provides affordable apartments for domestic staff within Pacific Heights itself. No more 2-hour commutes, no more choosing between rent and their children's education. The first building," she smiled at Victoria, "will be your former guest house." Victoria felt tears welling in her eyes, but for the first time in her life, she didn't try to hide them. "I accept the position," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent room. "Not as a punishment, but as a privilege." Linda nodded approvingly. "Finally, you understand what real power is." "It's not about being served," Victoria continued, the words coming from a place of newfound clarity. "It's about being of service." Maya raised her glass, and the room followed suit. "To new beginnings," she toasted, "and to the real legacy of Pacific Heights, not its mansions, but its people, all of its people." As the gathering transformed into a true celebration of community and change, Victoria stood beside her mother, both of them wearing the uniform that had once seemed like a mark of shame, but now felt like a badge of honor. The crystal chandelier above caught the morning sun, sending rainbow lights dancing across the room, a room that had witnessed countless society parties, but never true civilization until this moment. Maya's master plan had succeeded beyond mere revenge. She had orchestrated not just the fall of one proud woman, but the resurrection of an entire community's soul. With Linda's wisdom, Eleanor's transformation, and Victoria's humbling, she had woven together a tapestry of redemption that would change Pacific Heights forever. And Victoria Montgomery Wells, former queen of society, found that serving others offered a crown far more meaningful than the one she'd worn before. In the end, it wasn't about losing her position at all. It was about finding her true place in the world. The fog outside had lifted completely now, revealing a clear view of the bay beyond. A new day had dawned in Pacific Heights, and with it, a new understanding of what it truly meant to be upper class.